June 12, 1969. Da Nang, South Vietnam. The night air is thick with the smell of diesel, gunpowder, and rain. A soldier named Michael Torres sits alone in a sandbag bunker, his rifle across his knees, a Marlboro trembling between his fingers. The jungle hums beyond the perimeter: frogs, crickets, something else. Every rustle sounds like movement. Every shadow breathes. He has been awake for 47 hours. His eyes burn from exhaustion, but he refuses to close them. 2 nights ago, his squad walked into an ambush outside a hamlet near Hill 55. When the gunfire stopped, the corpsman's flashlight moved across what used to be faces. Since then, Torres hasn't spoken. He just listens to the buzzing of mosquitoes, the popping of flares, and the faint clicking sound that no one else hears. At 03:17, a flare bursts overhead, flooding the bunker in artificial daylight. The jungle freezes for a heartbeat, then vanishes again into darkness. Torres lights another cigarette. Somewhere behind him, a sergeant mutters in his sleep something about the perimeter, about tripwires. Torres stares out into the void, waiting for the next explosion. He will survive the war, but the war will not leave him. 10 years later, in a small apartment in Detroit, Torres wakes again to the sound of gunfire. Only it isn't real. It's a backfiring car on Gratiot Avenue. He drops to the floor before he even realizes it, heart pounding, skin slick with sweat. His wife stands frozen in the doorway, watching him crawl under the table. It's been like this for years: flashes, smells, sounds. A plastic bag drifting in the wind reminds him of a flare. The scent of burning oil from a passing truck sends him back to Da Nang. Sleep is a battlefield. Waking life is the war zone that follows. The Veterans Administration calls it post-traumatic stress disorder. But for men like Torres, it feels less like a disorder than a haunting, a slow invasion of the mind by things once buried in the jungle mud. In 1980, the American Psychiatric Association officially names it PTSD, after years of silence and stigma. Before that, they called it shell shock, combat fatigue, or nothing at all. Soldiers returned from Vietnam to parades that never came, to families that couldn't understand. Many drank, many used heroin, many, like Torres, just withdrew into rooms where the blinds stayed closed. Across the country, a generation of men drifted over 700,000 veterans suffering from symptoms they couldn't name. Flashbacks, rage, guilt, nightmares that smelled of rot and gun oil. The war had ended in 1975, but for them, it had never really stopped. In one therapy session recorded in 1982, a Marine named Joseph Caldwell sits before a VA psychologist in Los Angeles. He says, "I can't sleep without the radio on. If it's quiet, I hear them, the ones we lost." His hands shake as he speaks. He's 34. His hair is already gray. The therapist nods, writes something on a clipboard. Caldwell looks up, searching her face for something human. "You don't get it," he says softly. "It's not memory. It's happening. Every night. Over and over. Outside the hospital. The city hums cars, laughter, life. Inside, time is frozen. The war echoes through the corridors in voices that never stop whispering. By the early 1990s, suicide rates among Vietnam veterans rise alarmingly, nearly 1.5 times higher than among non-veterans. Alcoholism, divorce, homelessness. The government releases new statistics every year, but numbers cannot describe the ghosts that follow these men home. They had once fought an enemy they could see. Now, the enemy lives behind their eyes. Torres stands at his kitchen sink one morning, the radio playing faintly. A new war has begun, this time in the Persian Gulf. Reporters speak of surgical strikes and clean victories. He listens, then turns the volume down. Outside, children play in the street. He grips the counter, his knuckles white. He whispers to no one, "There's no such thing as clean." April 7th, 2004, Fallujah, Iraq. The city is burning. Sand and smoke hang heavy in the air, the color of rust and ash. Sergeant Daniel Reese crouches behind a crumbling wall, his M4 rifle pressed against his shoulder. The sun above his merciless heat waves shimmer through rising dust. Somewhere down the alley, a radio crackles with garbled commands. He's 26, from Omaha, Nebraska. Before this, he fixed cars in his father's garage. Now, every sound a metal door. A distant shout feels like a trigger. His squad moves street by street, house by house. They clear rooms that smell of sweat, blood, and fear. Children cry behind closed doors. Dogs bark endlessly. When night falls, the city glows with tracer fire. Reese writes in his journal, words shaking on the page. I keep seeing their faces. The ones we couldn't save. The ones we didn't mean to kill. A mortar lands 3 blocks away. The walls tremble. Dust falls like snow. Reese stops writing. He whispers, "Not again."
What?
Back home, months later. He drives the same roads he once knew, but the world feels unreal, too quiet, too clean. Fireworks on the 4th of July send him diving behind his car. At work, the clang of a dropped wrench makes him flinch so hard he bleeds from his lip. He hides it, smiles, says it's fine. But at night, his dreams betray him. He's back in Fallujah. The sound of the call to prayer morphs into a scream. The light becomes the flash of an explosion. The smell of gasoline becomes the odor of burning flesh. He wakes up gasping, drenched in sweat, his wife holding him, whispering, "It's okay. You're home." But he isn't. Not really. In 2007, the Department of Veterans Affairs estimates that nearly 20% of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans suffer from PTSD, over 300,000 men and women. Doctors describe it as a malfunction of the survival instinct. Soldiers describe it differently. It's like the war came home with me. Reese stops answering calls from his unit. He avoids the reunions, the barbecues, the thank you for your service conversations. He spends his evenings in the garage, staring at the cars he no longer repairs. The tools are lined perfectly. A soldier's precision never fades. On the shelf above the workbench sits his helmet, still coated in desert dust. He never cleaned it. One winter evening, he drives aimlessly through town. Snow falls in pale sheets under the streetlights. He turns the radio to a news broadcast, another story about a veteran's suicide. The anchor's voice is calm, sterile, detached. Reese turns it off. The silence in the car feels louder than any explosion. He pulls over by the river and steps outside. The cold air bites at his skin. For a moment, he feels nothing. No fear, no noise, no war. Just the slow rush of water. Then he hears it again, the sound that never leaves. A faint echo of boots on sand. The hum of a helicopter. A child crying in Arabic. It's not real, but it is. Across the country, thousands of others like him wake up each night to the same invisible battlefield. Some drink to silence it, some run, some don't survive. In 2012, the U.S. Department of Defense releases a report: one American veteran dies by suicide every 65 minutes. That's over 8,000 lives a year, more than were lost in combat in Afghanistan and Iraq combined. The numbers barely register in the headlines. The wars have ended, at least. Officially, the rest is silence. Reese attends a group therapy session in 2015. The room is small, windowless, smelling faintly of coffee and disinfectant. A circle of folding chairs holds men and women of every age. Some speak, some stare at the floor. A young woman with the 101st Airborne patch says softly, "I don't remember what peace feels like." Reese looks at her and nods. No one claps, no one comforts. They just sit there, breathing in the same ghost air, haunted by things they can't name. Outside, dusk settles over the parking lot. The sun dips behind a water tower painted red and white. Reese leans against his car, watching his breath turn to vapor. He thinks of Torres, the Vietnam vet who used to visit the auto shop, who once told him, "Kid, it never goes away. You just learn to walk with it." He didn't believe him then. Now he does. The wars change. The weapons evolve. The battlefields shift. But the human mind, fragile, soft, unarmored, breaks the same way it always has. Reese starts the car and drives into the dark, headlights cutting through the snow. For a moment, he thinks he sees movement in the rearview mirror, a figure in uniform, eyes hollow. Fading into shadow, he blinks. It's gone. Only the sound of his heartbeat remains. October 17, 2018, Bethesda, Maryland. The halls of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center smell of antiseptic and rain-soaked concrete. In room 432B, under the hum of fluorescent light, a research team observes a brain scan on a glowing monitor, bright splashes of red and yellow marking hyperactive fear circuits. The patient, a 32-year-old Army medic named Leah Patterson, sits still inside the MRI tube. Her eyes are closed, but her hands twitch. Outside the glass, Dr. Karen Liu notes the readings: elevated amygdala response, suppressed prefrontal regulation, elevated cortisol. Her body thinks it's still in combat. Liu murmurs, "Even now." Leah was stationed in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, in 2011. She carried no weapon, only a medic's pack, yet saw more death than most infantrymen. When her convoy hit an IED, she pulled 3 soldiers from the wreckage. 1 survived, 2 didn't. For years afterward, she smelled diesel and burnt metal in her dreams. The war followed her home, invisible but constant. Loud noises made her drop to the ground. Crowded grocery stores sent her into panic. Even the sound of her child crying could trigger flashbacks, the sound too close to the wounded she once tended. She tried to explain it to her husband. "It's like, my brain's still over there," she said once. He nodded. But he didn't really understand. No one who hasn't been there ever does. Now, inside this sterile room, scientists call it trauma imprinting. The military calls it combat stress injury. Leah calls it the ghost. Every generation of war brings new ghosts. Vietnam had shell shock. Iraq had PTSD. Today, the phrase has become almost clinical, emptied of the weight it once carried. But behind each diagnosis lies a story, a scream that never stopped echoing. In 2019, a Rand Corporation study estimates that 1 in 5 U.S. service members returning from post-9/11 conflicts show symptoms of PTSD or major depression. That's roughly 500,000 soldiers. Half never seek treatment. Many can't. The stigma runs deep. If you're not strong enough to handle it, one Marine sergeant told a researcher, "You shouldn't have signed up." That's how silence survives. In the same hospital, down the hall, sits a therapy group of mixed veterans. Some from Mosul, some from Kandahar, some old men from Hughes City still coming after 50 years. Their eyes carry the same weight, the 1,000-yard stare of people who have seen the world stripped of illusion. An older man named Torres, now gray, slow, but alive, tells Leah quietly, We all left pieces of ourselves over there. Some of us never came back to get them. She nods, tears, silent. Across from her, a younger man named Reese stares at the floor, his hands clasped, a tremor running through them. They don't know each other's wars, but they share the same aftermath, the same ghosts. Outside, a storm rolls in from the Atlantic. Thunder cracks like distant artillery. For a moment, the whole ward seems to hold its breath. Later that night, Leah sits by her hospital window. Rain streaks down the glass like tracer lines. She opens her notebook and writes, "We talk about the war like it ended, but it's still happening, just quieter." She closes the notebook, exhales, and presses her forehead to the glass. Far below, the hospital garden gleams under the rain statues of soldiers frozen in salute, surrounded by manicured grass. They look proud, unbroken, immortal. But the living soldiers inside these walls are anything but. Torres passes by her room on his way out, cane tapping softly against the floor. Reese walks beside him. For a second, 3 generations of war-crossed paths: Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, united not by victory, but by survival. Liu watches them from the nurse's station. She's seen the data, the scans, the charts. She knows PTSD is not just psychological, it rewires the brain itself, creating loops of fear that never stop firing. But data doesn't capture the silence, the way these men and women move through the world half present, haunted by sounds only they can hear. In the parking lot, rain falls harder. Reese fumbles for his keys, then looks at Torres. "You think it ever ends?" he asks. Torres gives a tired smile. "No, but you learn to live between the echoes." The 2 men stand there for a moment, rain on their faces, breath fogging in the cold air, and in that stillness, something unspoken passes between them. Not peace, not closure, but understanding. As they drive away, Leah watches their taillights vanish into the storm. She whispers to herself, maybe that's enough. Inside the hospital, the lights flicker once, then steady again. The war continues not in deserts or jungles, but in minds, in memories, in the quiet spaces of civilian life where silence feels too much like danger. March 21st, 2023, Washington, D.C. The Capitol dome gleams pale beneath a gray spring sky. Inside, under the vaulted ceiling of room 217 in the Rayburn House office building, lawmakers gather for a hearing titled "Invisible Casualties: The Mental Health Crisis Among Veterans." Cameras click, journalists take notes. Rows of veterans sit silently behind them, medals glinting faintly on worn jackets. At the front, Dr. Karen Liu adjusts the microphone. Her voice trembles slightly at first. "Mr. Chairman, the data is clear," she says. Over 4 decades after Vietnam and 20 years after Iraq, the psychological toll of war remains catastrophic. PTSD is not rare. It's systemic. It's generational. Behind her, a screen flashes the numbers. 1 in 5 returning service members from Iraq and Afghanistan diagnosed with PTSD. 30% of Vietnam veterans still suffering symptoms. More than 6,000 veteran suicides per year, 1 every 80 minutes. Silence fills the room, heavier than any explosion. From the audience, a voice breaks through gravelly. Exhausted. What about the ones who don't come forward? Heads turn. It's Michael Torres, 74, standing with a cane, eyes clouded but steady. You count the dead. You don't count the living ghosts. A murmur ripples through the chamber. Dr. Liu meets his gaze. then nods quietly. "You're right. Mr. Torres?" she says. "We don't." Outside the building, the city hums as usual, commuters, traffic, phones ringing. Yet beneath the noise runs a quieter current, a hidden network of broken minds connected by pain, memory, and silence. They call it the Shadow Network, the unspoken brotherhood of veterans who never stopped fighting. In a warehouse basement in Baltimore, a small group meets every Wednesday night. There are no uniforms, no ranks, no speeches, just chairs in a circle, coffee in paper cups, and the faint smell of motor oil from the auto shop upstairs. Reese is there. Leah too. And an older man, thin and pale, whose name none of them know, but whose arms are tattooed with the unit insignia of the 173rd Airborne. He speaks first. "They told me I'd be home by Christmas," he says. "That was 1967. Every night since, I've gone back. No one interrupts. They all understand." Leah listens, then tells her story: the explosion, the nightmares, the MRI scans. "They say it's brain chemistry," she whispers. "But it feels like a curse." Reese nods slowly. "The curse is remembering." Torres sits in the corner, eyes half closed, hands resting on his cane. "And the cure," he murmurs, "is remembering together." They talk until the shop lights go out. Then they sit in the dark. The hum of the refrigerator, the only sound. No one cries, no one prays, but something fragile, almost sacred, holds them there, a shared understanding that survival is not the end of war, only another form of it. Outside, the rain starts again, pattering softly on the corrugated roof. Reese stands and looks at the others. "Next week?" he asks. A few nod. Leah gives a faint smile. "Yeah," she says, "next week." They disperse into the night, headlights flaring one by one, fading down the wet streets of the city. Each of them will go home and face their ghosts again. But they will also know now that they are not alone. Weeks later, Leah returns to the hospital as a volunteer counselor. She sits with younger veterans just back from deployment, their eyes too alert, their bodies tense. She tells them, quietly, that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to carry what you can. She says, some listen, some don't. But her voice, calm, even grounded, begins to echo through the ward, a counterpoint to the silence that once defined these walls. Torres passes away that summer, peacefully, in his sleep, at his funeral, held at Arlington National Cemetery. Reese delivers a short eulogy. He taught me that ghosts aren't something to fear. They're proof that we lived. The wind carries the words over rows of white stones. Flags ripple. The sound of a bugle drifts across the field. For a moment, everything is still. Night falls over Washington. In a small apartment overlooking the Potomac, Leah stands at her window, watching the city lights shimmer like distant fires. She opens her journal and writes one final line. Some wars end on paper, others last a lifetime. She closes the notebook, exhales, and lets the quiet fill the room. Down below, sirens wail faintly, a reminder that the world keeps moving, indifferent and alive. But for those who returned from the battlefield carrying invisible wounds, each breath is still an act of endurance. The camera lingers on her face, calm, resolute, lined with the kind of strength born only from survival, before fading slowly to black. February 12th, 2030, Austin, Texas. The air smells faintly of cedar and rain. In a quiet suburban home on the outskirts of the city, a boy named Evan Torres 17 years old, sits in front of a flickering television. On the screen plays an old war documentary, muted. The captions crawling across images of helicopters over the jungle. His mother, Maria, stands behind him, folding laundry. He pauses the video. The screen freezes on a face he knows: his grandfather, Sergeant Michael Torres, recorded decades ago in an interview for PBS. The old man's eyes are distant, unfocused. As he says, "Some of us came home, some didn't. But the truth is, none of us ever really left." Evan rewinds it, listens again, the voice static and tired. He never met his grandfather. The man died before he was born. But sometimes, late at night, he dreams of a jungle he's never seen, of rain falling on tin helmets, of the smell of smoke and fear. His mother once told him, "You have his eyes." Now, looking at the screen, he wonders if he inherited more than that. By 2030, PTSD is no longer a hidden topic. The phrase has entered everyday language in schools, offices, even advertisements. Yet for families like the Torreses, the impact is deeper, stranger, more insidious. Neuroscientists at Stanford call it epigenetic inheritance trauma encoded in the body, passed silently between generations. Studies show that children of war survivors often exhibit heightened stress responses, anxiety, and recurring nightmares without direct exposure to violence. In a public lecture, Dr. Karen Liu, now head of the National Center for Trauma Studies, explains the mind remembers in ways the brain can't explain. What one generation experiences in terror, the next feels as unease. She pauses, looks at the audience. Trauma doesn't die, it adapts. That same week, Evan visits the Veterans Memorial near downtown Austin. Its early morning mist clings to the names etched in granite. He runs his fingers over the letters: Michael Torres, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. A soft breeze stirs the trees. Somewhere nearby, a group of school children laugh. The sound feels both alien and sacred. Evan kneels and places a folded photograph beneath his grandfather's name, a black and white image of Michael in uniform, smiling faintly beside a man he never identified. The caption on the back reads, Hill 55, 1969. He doesn't cry. He just sits there, tracing the letters, hearing in his mind the faint echo of a voice that once said, "You just learn to walk with it." Wakao. Later that evening, he joins a live stream discussion hosted by a veterans group called Echoes of War. Among the speakers are former soldiers, psychologists, and second-generation family members. The topic, the long shadow, how war outlives the battlefield. Reese appears briefly older now, with deep lines around his eyes. "When I got back," he says softly, "I thought the hardest part was surviving. Turns out, it's living afterward with everything you saw and everything you lost." Leah sits beside him, nodding. "We've spent years trying to name what can't be named. But maybe healing isn't about ending the echo. Maybe it's about teaching the next generation to listen to it without fear." Evan types in the chat, "I never fought, but I still feel it." The moderator reads his comment aloud. Silence follows. Then Leah looks directly into the camera. "You're part of it too," she says. "The memory doesn't end with us. You carry it forward so it won't happen again." For the first time, Evan feels something that isn't guilt or confusion. It's understanding, fragile, uncertain, but real. That night, he writes an essay for school titled "The War My Family Never Left." In it, he describes the smell of old uniforms, the sound of documentaries replaying on forgotten channels, the way his mother's hands tremble whenever fireworks begin. He ends it with a line borrowed from Leah's speech: "Some wars end, others are inherited. His teacher gives it an A. She writes in the margin, "Thank you for reminding us that history still breathes." In a final shot, the documentary's closing sequence, the camera drifts through a collage of faces: Torres, Reese, Leah, and now Evan, all fading into one another like overlapping transparencies. A voiceover calm, quiet. Almost a whisper speaks over the montage. The battlefield changes, but the silence remains. Between generations, the echo travels carried by memory, by blood, by the stories we dare to tell. And maybe that's the only way wars ever truly end, not with peace treaties, but with remembrance. The screen fades to black. A single white line appears, dedicated to the 22 veterans who take their own lives every day, and to those still fighting the invisible war. From Vietnam to Afghanistan, over 3 million veterans worldwide have suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, with rates of chronic symptoms often surpassing 25%. Studies from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs estimate that between 2001 and 2020, more than 120,000 veterans died by suicide casualties of wars that continued long after the last bullet was fired. The phenomenon is not uniquely American. Soviet veterans of Afghanistan, British troops from the Falklands, and Ukrainian defenders from Donbass and Mariupol all describe the same invisible wounds: hypervigilance, guilt, recurring nightmares, emotional disconnection. War leaves no generation untouched. Its scars do not fade, they evolve, passed quietly from those who fought to those who remember. What remains now is the question we must all face. How long will we let the echoes of war define the living? What are your thoughts on the unseen epidemic of PTSD among veterans and the silence surrounding it? Please share your perspective in the comments below.